Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiogogue, joined this afternoon, where I am anyway, by Antaios, and very, very pleased that it is so. We will be continuing our discussion of Light in Darkness, a review of secret societies and secret orders. Secret societies and secret services. We began with the Florentine Neoplatonists, although that involved looking back into history as far back as Plato himself. And we're marching forward in time, hoping always to arrive at the present day. Our current episode will focus upon the Enlightenment and the Illuminati. Now, before I get to the boilerplate introduction stuff and all the rest, and welcome our guest, please let me know whether or not the audio is good. I'm still working with this new microphone setup, and I'm trying to get it all sorted. So yes, please let me know what's going on with audio, both on my end and once Antaios starts speaking. If you could let me know in the chat whether his levels need to come up or down, and I can attempt to address that as we go forward. All right. So first off, please follow this channel, Semiogogue, as well as A Safer Space. You can do that on YouTube. You can do that on BitChute, though sometimes I really do wonder why you would. There is also Odyssey, which I recommend very much. It seems to be coming along very, very well. I see Antaios shares my view on that. And then there is Minds, there is Gab, there is Twitter, and there is Telegram. Which I am increasingly active with. So please do follow me on Telegram. Please do follow me over on Odyssey, as well as these many other options. Next, I should go ahead and celebrate the Praetorian chats that make all of this possible. Let me just share my screen here. These are the channel supporters. They generously contribute and make all of this possible. These folks deserve my thanks. As is written here, all of the credit and none of the blame. Thank you all very, very much indeed for your kind support of the channel. And what else do we have? Very quickly, we have my science fiction book, Vinculum, which is set in an ugly dystopian future in the year 2076 in Istanbul. It's about a book thief, a specialist as well in breaking and entering and stealing collections of texts. And this tale covers his attempt to get his hands on a certain kind of book while pursued by remorseless corporate hitmen and a strange esoteric sect of assassins. So you can find that on Amazon. There's also my book of poems, Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. You can find that under Oliver Timken Perrin. And I hope that you will consider it. So allow me now, thank you, patient folks, as well as patient guests. Allow me now to introduce our guest this evening. He's returning again to help us with this review of some esoteric history, a man with a background in history himself, who, as I understand it, became somewhat disaffected with academia, and decided that he was going to do his own thing. Welcome, Antaios, and perhaps you can just give us a quick introduction to yourself for those who don't yet know you, and to what you will be covering tonight.
Hi, Semiogogue. Thanks for having me on again. Yes, I'm Antaios from Germany. I'm a student of history, or rather was a student of history. Did a BA, another BA, and then an MA in history, focusing on European history mostly. I speak several languages, and it was first on JF Gariepi's channel, The Public Space, and then that I talked about China, the French Revolution, and there you discovered me, and we hashed out this cooperation on secret society and their impact on Western history. And today we're going to delve in the secret society par excellence, the Illuminati.
Excellent. I was just about to type here into the stream, but I can do it with my audio. Okay, Jonathan Gordon kindly let us know. Good audio from Antaios. If anyone else is having any problems with the levels, which at least I can address, then do let us know. In the course of it, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat and straighten that out. And I'm glad, Antaios, as you did last time, that you brought up JF Garapi's channel. He was kind enough to have me on as a guest many times. I would not have known about you had I not encountered you over on his channel. So this is a good point to give a shout out for him and for his channel. If you're looking for information on science and any number of other things, but most particularly things scientific, JF has a very much scientific mind, and he's also not he's not willing to be constrained in his thinking by what people tell him he should think. So it's a refreshing channel to review, and I recommend him highly. Okay, so we covered the business with the Florentine Neoplatonists, the rise of this relationship between people who are interested in esoteric ideas and it, as it happens, the remaking of society along the lines of these esoteric ideas. We tracked that association between these people and bankers and the very, very wealthy and political situations from the Florentine Neoplatonists, the Renaissance in Italy, up through the Rosicrucians, which we discussed in our last episode. There are 3 in the back catalog I recommend everybody check out. And this evening we've moved past the Rosicrucians, though there's probably arguably there could be a little bit of overlap in time as regards some of these figures who might have been very, very late in the Rosicrucian movement and very, very early in what became the Illuminati. But it's basically the next stage, because as I understand it, we're moving now to the 18th century instead of so much the 17th. And the scene upon which our play will unfold is Germany, is it not?
It is Germany. More specifically, and let me go ahead and share the screen, Bavaria. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, let me see if I can plug this in. Okay, yes, and Bavaria, as far as I know, it's even to this day, it remains a very Catholic part of Germany, does it not?
That's true.
In terms of historical context. Okay, well, I will let you take it away.
Yes, so like most parts of southern Germany, Bavaria is also Catholic, so Protestants are more concentrated in the north of Germany. And the Illuminati, they were founded in a small city called Ingolstadt, which at that time had the leading university of Bavaria. Their center of activity, or their headquarters, was in Munich, the so-called Areopagus, the inner circle. And their main activities were in Bavaria, as you can see indicated in this circle. But they were also quite active in Middle Germany. So in the duchies of Hessen-Kassel, the Duchy of Gotha, and the Duchy of Weimar. And it is actually in the Duchy of Gotha, right here, where Adam Weishaupt takes refuge after his order is discovered. So now that we know about their geography, let's continue with Adam Weishaupt. And we're going to start just very briefly to give everybody an overview of what happened after they were discovered. So the Illuminati were outlawed in 1785, and then Adam Weishaupt fled from Ingolstadt, first to the imperial city of Regensburg and then to the Duchy of Gotha.
And, one thing on Antaios, if I may, please forgive me. Could you just sort of give us just the simplest overview of what this organization is? Because we're already talking about them being outlawed and where they were located. Could you just sort of let people who might not have any background know what we're talking about in this simplest terms? I know you'll expand on it.
Sure. So the Illuminati were a secret society that was very much against religion, against superstition, and for enlightenment. And their plan was to create something like the French Revolution. So in their documents, they say they wanted to make rule of man over man unnecessary and to make men free. But in their secret communication, in their correspondence, it is quite clear that they wanted to overthrow the Catholic order, monarchy, install something like a republic, and they were very staunch enemies of the Jesuits. And they were also fighting with the Rosicrucians over influence in Freemasonry, because at this time we talked about the legend of the Rosicrucians in the last show. There were the Rosicrucian manifestos published from 1614 to 1617. But then in the 18th century, in the middle of the 18th century, some Freemasons decided, hey, let's create an order of the Goldie and Rosicrucians. This was a mystical order, a magical order, but the Illuminati were very much the opposite of that. They were also a secret society, but they were very much for enlightenment, rationality, and against religion. And they were founded in 1776, and they were outlawed in 1785. There was some activity after this, but at the end of the 18th century, there are no traces of them.
Very good, thank you. And I guess we can move forward now.
All right. So yes, Adam Weishaupt, after his order gets banned, he starts writing a lot of books to justify his order. And the first one is an apology of the Illuminati, published in 1786, where he styles himself as a modern Socrates. He styles himself on the apology that Plato wrote about his teacher, Socrates. Socrates, of course, was dragged before the court on the basis that he corrupted the youth and introduced new gods. And the allegation that was leveled against Weishaupt was exactly this, that he corrupted the youth. A Jesuit said just this about Adam Weishaupt. Here Weishaupt says it was only about making people free, about pushing, about helping the virtuous against the wicked. This is his justification. But then, just 1 year later, there is a publication of the secret letters of the Illuminati, because 1 year before there was a house search at one of the members of the inner circle, and the correspondence of the Illuminati is published.
And may I ask who it was, under whose police service, which monarch had their security forces seize these papers? And, just because it gives us context, was it, for example, a Catholic prince or lord, or a Protestant? Who was it?
It was the person we see on the left, Charles Theodore, Elector of Bavaria, who was Catholic, and he was raised by Jesuits. So there we have the old enemy of the Rosicrucians and of the Illuminati again. And in order to give the audience an impression of how it was to be initiated into the Illuminati, let's, Semiogogue and I, let us just read a protocol of an initiation. And this protocol is undated. It is of an unnamed jurist who was initiated by Franz Zwack, by the very person at whom this house search had taken place. So, Semiogogue, would you be the initiator?
Yeah, yes, of course. Okay, so how should I begin? Does he still intend joining and being accepted into the order?
I have, until now, no doubts about joining it.
For which reasons is he joining the order? What does he expect in it?
The reason which determines me in joining the order derives itself from the final goal of the order, for as it aims at toppling the evil-minded and at helping the well-intentioned, I happily assume any duty by which this can be achieved.
What if indecent and unjust things were committed? How would he react?
I will not refuse to carry it out if the common good be furthered by this.
If he can and wants to identify the weal of the order with his own?
I can and want to identify it with my own.
If he wants to love all members of the order?
Considering that they are members of the order, I will love them all.
Even if he were to discover his enemies among the order?
Regardless, I will.
If he grants this society or order the right over life and death in all cases, for whatever reason?
For the reason that I grant this right to the rulers of this world in exercising power over life and death of humans, for this very reason I eagerly grant my order this right which, as should the rulers of the world, promotes the common good.
If he wants to discriminate between members of the order, giving them preference over other profanes?
Why not this?
How would he act? Should he regret having joined the order?
Should this be the case, I would ask my superiors if they can discharge me of my duties under the condition that I keep secrecy about everything concerning the order.
Should the order, against all given promises, not let him go, would this not lead to further extreme steps? And how he would conduct himself in this situation?
I would be silent, for my constant complaints would only harass the order and not improve my own situation.
Is he a member of another order?
No.
Should he consider joining another one in the future?
Never will I accept another order, should this be of harm to my order.
Under which threat of punishment does he join this order?
Loss of my honor and life shall be the punishment for my mistakes.
Basically saying he would be disgraced and killed were he to leave it. Yes.
In reality, a lot of people left the order. A lot of people were kicked out, and they lived happily ever after. We also need to take into account that the initiations, the grades, they changed over time because Weishaupt founded this order and he had no clue what he was doing. He was an amateur. It was work in progress. They were developing these grades, the mysteries, the structures from the ground up. Weishaupt joined the Freemasons in 1777. 1 year after he founded the order. He had no experience whatsoever with secret or discreet societies.
But he had come from what, Ingersoll, and was educated by Jesuits, was he not, himself?
He was.
And is there anything that we can glean as an insight with this odd fact that the Declaration of Independence and the formation of the Order of the Illuminati seem to correspond in time to 1776? Perhaps you were going to get to that. I'm sorry if I've gotten you out of order.
Sure, it was the same year, but there is no connection between the founding fathers and Adam Weishaupt at this time, and I'm not aware that there was later. The founding fathers were overwhelmingly Freemasons, but Adam Weishaupt only joined Freemasonry 1 year after the Declaration of Independence. And mind that Weishaupt was just 28 years old when he founded the order. So why would the founding fathers heed the ideas of a 28-year-old German living in Bavaria?
Who had not yet infiltrated any of the secret societies that, as we will shortly learn, they intentionally set out to infiltrate. However, it does seem to me that perhaps it is only coincidence. I would not suggest that that the one organization influenced the other event, but it certainly does seem at least possible and once more, I'm very ignorant on this subject, but it seems at least possible that there is something to that, things happening in the same year, not that the one influenced the other, but perhaps that a program was launched in a variety of ways, in a variety of places. But this is obviously just speculation.
Maybe it was a program, maybe it was the Weltgeist, as Hegel said, the world spirit, which was directing history to ever more freedom.
Indeed. Emergent behavior, yes.
Okay, so now that we've been initiated into the Illuminati, let's learn a little bit more about how their correspondence worked. And now every secret society needs a cipher, needs a secret script, so that profanes, so that outsiders do not understand what's going on in case they find one of their letters. And the screenshot that I've showed you here, on the left side, we see the publication that was printed under Charles Theodore in 1700.
And didn't you tell me this is something that has not yet appeared ever in English?
No.
Okay.
Maybe
well, you're seeing it for the first time here, ladies and gentlemen.
Maybe this is the reason why there's so many strange theories out there about the Illuminati. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm showing you a transcript of a letter that was published by the Bavarian government in 1787. And this is a letter written by Weishaupt to Zwack. So Zwack was the person at whom this house search had taken place. This letter is from November 1778. And now I'm going to translate the parts in blue to you. We're going to start off with the one in the middle, with the square in the middle. Before everything, make sure that Hermes starts recruiting. Then he must deliver. Give him the order to surveil the 4/8/1820, 4/19/8/13 in his locality very diligently. Semiogogue, do you have an idea who the 4/8/1820, 4/19/8/13 are?
No, but if I had to guess, maybe Jesuits?
Bingo. The cipher of the Illuminati is really amateurish. They have like a number is a letter. The 4 stands for I, the 8 stands for E, and so on. So you can see here, they are quite amateurish. They could have come up with a better cipher. Anyways.
But one quick thing to point out for our viewers is that we have consistently seen this theme of cryptography, and it moves behind the scenes. As early as the Florentine Neoplatonists, with which we started this series, you have the figure of, I believe it's Leon Battista Alberti, who is famous as an architect and artist and philosopher, as part of Marsilio Ficino's circle, his Neoplatonic Academy, but he's also famous for an early work on cryptography. And it also happens that Leon Battista Alberti took as his emblem the Eye of Providence, which we can see as becoming the all-seeing eye of God. So as early as the Florentine Neoplatonists, we have the idea of an eye of providence, an all-seeing eye of God. In Alberti's case, it was cast on his commemorative medal with the Latin beneath reading quid tum, which means sort of like, you could translate it as so what, but you could also translate it as what then, sort of suggesting that if the eye of God is looking down upon you, what then would you do? At any rate, we see this theme of an eye of providence, or an all-seeing eye, and cryptography, and now we've sort of marched in time. Certainly, we discussed in the clip on the Rosicrucians, the fascination with cryptography. We also know that it's likely Dee and Trithemius of Wurzburg and Agrippa were all involved with cryptography. And here we see, yet again, the emergence of cryptography, though, as Antaios points out here, it's a very, very simple and sort of easy to deal with cipher.
And we continue. At the bottom, we have the place and the date. Eleusis, the 24th of Aben-Me. Eleusis is the code word for Ingolstadt. This is where Weishaupt is a professor. So he's kind of pretentious. He sits at Eleusis, at the center of the Eleusinian mysteries. The Eleusinian mysteries, if I remember correctly, were the most prestigious mystery school in the ancient world.
Yeah, they survive with the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii, showing some of their iconography and symbolism. Yes.
And the date, the 24th of Aben-Me. Aben-Me is a part of the Persian calendar, and it means November. And at the bottom, he signs with the name Spartacus. Spartacus was the nom de guerre of Adam Weishaupt. And I mean, Spartacus, what did Spartacus do? What did Spartacus do, Semiogogue?
Well, he led an uprising of gladiators and slaves, one of the most serious ones ever faced by the Roman state. Yes. So revolution is definitely a part of this picture, is it not?
It so seems. It would seem so, yes.
And the theme of internationalism that we see with later movements like, or I should say internationalist sort of, how shall I say this? International syncretism and cross-cultural syncretism that we will later see with things like Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society, this sort of thing. You know, the use of these Persian names of the months, right?
Yes, exactly. And the fact that he chooses Eleusis and the Persian calendar, this shows that at the beginning, Weishaupt wanted to model his organization on either on the Eleusinian mysteries or on Zoroastrism. This was his plan at the beginning, but later he will just copy the Freemasons. All right, so now that we know how they were communicating, let's have a look at yet another book that was published on the Freemasons. And there was another house search at another very influential member, a person called Tommaso Francesco di Bassos. He wasn't an Italian, it was just a German with an Italian name. He was a local baron, a mayor, Freemason, and a member of the inner circle of the Illuminati. And they found some 1,000 documents and letters, and they published a part of those yet again. Yeah, shit really hits the fan for Weishaupt and the Illuminati. And Weishaupt then starts publishing a lot of justifications of his order. So this is published in 1787. It is on the improved system of the Illuminati. There, Weishaupt explains the grades of the Illuminati. And if you look at the frontispiece, here you see Gothaischer Hofrat. So at this point in time, Weishaupt has become a court counselor at the Duchy of Gotha. And the Duchy of Gotha is ruled by Ernst II, Duke of Gotha, who is also a member of the Illuminati. So this is very handy.
And let me guess, he's probably not a Catholic.
He's Protestant.
Surprise, surprise.
Yes. And Weishaupt publishes quite a bit. I mean, he was professor, he led a secret society, and now he has a lot of free time. He publishes so much. In the same year, an introduction to my apology. A brief justification of my intentions. These books are all like 300 pages. In 1790, he publishes a book with a rather interesting title, Pythagoras, or Considerations on the Secret Art of World Government. Yes, so at this point in time, the Illuminati are all over the place. There's a public discussion. Weishaupt is being attacked. He justifies him, he attacks. And people notice this, and it is part of the international discourse in Europe at the time. And Mirabeau is one of the first writers outside of Germany who mentions the Illuminati. Mirabeau, of course, was a French nobleman and an early revolutionary in the French Revolution.
Yeah, we'll see him again in the upheavals in France.
He was president of the Jacobin Club. He was president of the Constitutional Assembly. And in 1788, 1 year before the French Revolution starts, he publishes a series called On the Prussian Monarchy. And in volume 5, he mentions the Illuminati. And I'm just going to give you some quotes. Everything changed in Bavaria when this good electorate fell in other hands. The priests, and especially the Jesuits, gained the scepter again, bringing with them their inseparable entourage, superstition, and ignorance. And here he's referring to Charles Theodore, who ascended the throne in 1773. The elector before him was a so-called enlightened monarch who was critical of Catholicism and who was favorable of enlightenment, rationality, and whatnot.
So would it be safe to say that this figure who replaced him, who we saw on screen, before, the one whose secret services seized the papers and the rest and published them, was he a kind of Catholic reaction to the previous attempt to liberalize before him?
I wouldn't say he was a reaction. It just so happened that he was the next in line to ascend the throne. He just happened to be educated by Jesuits, and his predecessor was educated by a good friend of the father of Adam Weishaupt. The prince who ruled before was educated by the godfather of Adam Weishaupt. Now, Mirabeau then talks about the founding of the Illuminati, and he says that there were some people of head and heart, as he says, at a Masonic lodge in Munich who founded the Order of the Illuminati. Mirabeau gets it wrong. The Illuminati infiltrate this lodge. But anyway, he then goes on. Their leaders of the Illuminati decided to found a secret society under their branch, to which they gave the name of the Order of the Illuminati. They were based on the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, but with diametrically opposed views. The Jesuits want to enslave man with superstition and despotism. The Illuminati thought that, by using the same means, to enlighten man and to make him happy and free. So this is, of course, a very positive notion on the Illuminati. Mirabeau, of course, is a Freemason and an enemy of the Catholic Church and of the Jesuits. And he then says the goal of the Illuminati was the betterment of the present system of government and of legislation. And what do we understand by this? What if the government and the legislation does not want to be changed? Will you push it a step further, like he did 1 year after the publication of this book, and start a revolution and kill the king? But what we can take away here is that the papers on the Illuminati that were published were circulating widely, and the contemporaries accepted that they were authentic. Weishaupt, in fact, said, yes, the letters published in these books are authentic, but they are. But the good letters of the order are not included, and they are presented in a tendentious manner. So we are really dealing with historically correct facts here. And
they're attested and confirmed by people immediately involved. So this is certainly not something that was just created as propaganda.
And after we've heard a positive take on the Illuminati, let's hear the negative one. Now, this is Augustin Baruel. He is a Jesuit, and during the French Revolution, he becomes a champion for restoration of absolute monarchy. He published 4 volumes called Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism. And here I've showed you I show you the 4th volume, and it was printed à Londres, in London. Semiogogue, do you have an idea why this could be published in London and not in Paris?
Well, it would, well, good gracious, if it's, no, there are several, but I would have to take up too much time going through my winding thought process. So please tell us.
So he was, of course, a Jesuit, a priest, and in 1789, the priests had to swear allegiance to the Constitution and not to the Pope. And he was a so-called refractory priest. He decided not to swear an oath on the Constitution. And when the revolution radicalized in 1792, most priests who did not swear this oath were sent off to the guillotine sèche, to the dry guillotine in French Guiana. This was a prison colony, and usually you didn't come back, you would die there. So he took exile in London. One of his friends was Edmund Burke, and there he published these books. The first 2 volumes, they are about the link between Freemasonry and Jacobinism. He says that the Freemasons are a satanic sect that go back to the Knights Templar. One of his arguments is that a Freemason, the Marquis de Lafayette, was in charge of the National Guards, and he put the French king in the prison, in the Temple. The Temple is a big complex that was the headquarters of the Knights Templar in the 13th century. And he's making the case, it's the Templars taking revenge. And the Freemasons, of course, at this time they say, we derive from King Solomon and from the Knights Templar. So this is a very common theory at this time. And in the 3rd and the 4th volume, he makes the case that the German Illuminati infiltrated French Freemasonry and then unleashed the French Revolution.
Perhaps this, and forgive me if this is something you were about to cover in a different spot, but I did want to ask, from what little I know, and it's not much, about the Illuminati, they did specifically have a stated methodology which included intentionally infiltrating existing secret societies and turning them to their own purposes. And at the same time, it also seems that they were focused on elite capture, not just the capture of elites in general, but specifically targeting disaffected elites who perhaps didn't climb as high up the ladder as they felt they could or should. And so since you mentioned this claim about them having infiltrated Masonic orders, I wanted to ask about it at this point.
Yes. I read his book, and he makes the case, the Illuminati infiltrated German Freemasonry. And then he sees the Freemasons, because many French revolutionaries were Freemasons. They carry out a revolution. So he says, all right, it must have come from the Illuminati. What he does is he says, there was a similarity in the approach of the of the Illuminati. The goals are similar to the Jacobins, and therefore it's the Illuminati. But he doesn't come up with a clear explanation how it worked, who did it, and if that would have been the case, we would have had some letters, we would have had some we would have had more documents on this, but we just don't.
So it seems you are skeptical of the claim.
Yes, I'm very skeptical. Also, Baruel in 1792, he writes a pamphlet where he says that the Jacobins are eating French priests and noblemen alive. This is, of course, a lie. I mean, why would French Freemasonry accept to be led by a German secret society? It doesn't make sense to me. And also, but the theory, I would call it a conspiracy theory. It's really an effective one, because it says, oh, the French Revolution came from Germany, from foreigners. But I will say this. At this moment, when we look at the papers that are published on the Illuminati, most of them they stop at the time of 1784, and there are much more papers that need to be published that are still in the archives, and maybe we can, if we look at those documents, we can make the case that there's actually a connection. But at this point,
go on. Sorry.
But at this point, I'm highly skeptical.
Yeah, but we do know that they were international, or were intended to be international from the outset. Is this not true?
The Illuminati had around 1,400 members. All of them were recruited in the Holy Roman Empire. There were some foreigners, some Frenchmen, some Italians, but it was because they were in Germany at that time. There is a branch in Switzerland which is not part of the Holy Roman Empire. For example, Pestalozzi, a famous educator, was part of the Illuminati. But apart from this, they were very much focused on the Holy Roman Empire, Bavaria, and the middle of the Holy Roman Empire.
So we did not see a particularly international makeup of them at the outset. So, for example, it wouldn't be likely, in your view, that they had, for example, French members who could have infiltrated French Masonic lodges and not be seen as Germans. I'm just asking because I have no exposure to this.
It could very well be the case that this happened. At least from the documents I've read, and I've read some 100 pages of their letters, I don't see any indication that they were operating internationally. I think we really need to wait for researchers to publish more of the documents, because the time after 1783, we don't really have a lot of documents. But this will come out in time. Yeah.
Very good. Well, sorry to derail you there. Let's continue.
Alrighty. Yeah, let's continue with a quote by Baruel. The sect and its conspiracies were discovered in Bavaria. The powerful, the deceived rulers took this for their death, so the Illuminati. Back in their holes, but more active than ever, in the underground of the underground, they arrived at the court of Philip of Orleans. They arrived at the court of Philip of Orleans with all their adepts and followers, who turned over the lodges of French Freemasonry. This monstrous association gave birth to all the disasters of the Revolution. The illuminated Jacobin Masons leave their underground lodges. Their howling announces to the powers that it is time for them to tremble, and that the day of the revolution has arrived. Now, Baruel paints the picture that the French, Philip of Orleans, who was a cousin of the French king, and who was also the Grand Master of the Grand Orient, the Mother Lodge of France. He makes the case that he cooperated with the Illuminati. Yes. And it is, of course, a good narrative to put it this way, because Philip of Orleans was a proponent of the French Revolution. Though he belonged to the House of Bourbon, to the ruling house, he supported the French Revolution. In his Palais Royal, he allowed the Jacobin Club to assemble and to print their pamphlets. He also voted to put his cousin, the king, to death. He was a member of the Constitutional Assembly. He was a leading revolutionary. And Baruel, of course, makes the point that he cooperated with the Illuminati, and he said, all right, I'm going to give you access to all our lodges and now kick off the revolution. And oops, let me go back here. And then finally, how do the Illuminati arrive in the United States? So in his book, Baruel writes, the Illuminati would send their triumphant regents to infect America. So after they have infected France, they will infect America. And Americans at this time are actually very scared that Illuminati might carry out a revolution in the US. And here, just as an example, Jedediah Morse, who was a reverend in New England, and he sided with the Federalist government under John Adams, and he was convinced that Thomas Jefferson was a member of the Illuminati and that the Democrat Party was about to destroy Christianity and carry out a revolution. And mind that at the same time, the Adams administration is passing the Aliens and Seditions Acts, which restricts the First Amendment for foreigners and those who are thought to be engaged in revolutions. And Reverend Morse holds a lot of sermons against Thomas Jefferson and against the Illuminati, and I quote. So one of those sermons he had printed in 1799, and he writes, there are no less than 1700 of the Illuminati among us, all bound together by oath and the most intimate correspondence. Nay, there is too much reason to fear that the many thousands of Frenchmen who are scattered throughout the United States are systematically conducting the plan of revolutionizing this country. So there you have it. This is how the Illuminati arrive in the American discourse.
And what is your view on the historicity of these claims? Does it seem to be supported? I mean, obviously we have a period document attesting the concern, but can you shed any more light on whether or not this was alarmism? You know, at this time, as I understand it, there were governments all across Europe who were, you know, going crazy about Freemasons and how they were going to subvert everything. And, you know, what do you make of this?
So there was, of course, some reason behind it, because, I mean, the French had just carried out a revolution. And for instance, the French ambassador was very active in trying to bring about a revolution in the US also. So there was definitely that danger. It was there, but the explanation that it were the Illuminati, that Thomas Jefferson was an Illuminati, is not very convincing, because Jefferson becomes president later. I mean, he didn't destroy Christianity, he didn't carry out a revolution, and mind that it was the Democrat Party under Jefferson who pushed for the Bill of Rights. The Federalists under Washington, they said, and under James Madison, they said, oh, no, we have separation of powers, it's all good, we don't need the Bill of Rights. Yeah, it seems we cannot confirm Thomas Jefferson to have been an Illuminati.
And it is so okay. So yeah, you just don't find it convincing. Very good. Very good.
Just very briefly on Augustin Baruel, his memoirs. He writes them 1798 in London in French, and here 1 year later, in 1799, we have a translation that is published in New York, and it is based on the second London edition. So within 1 year, you have two editions. You have a translation in London into English, two editions, and it is printed in the US. So this is how fast it spreads. Okay, now just very briefly on the sources that we're looking at. This is really up to date. This is top notch. This is, if you want to study the Illuminati, first you have to master German, I'm afraid, and then you get these two books. So these books include, in a chronological order with annotations, all the letters that were published in these books. But they contain even more. They contain some of the private letters of Adam Weishaupt, some letters of other Illuminati, and most important, the so-called Swedish Chest. The Swedish Chest is a chest which contains 20 books, 20 folios, which are full of letters, of protocols, and so on, of the Illuminati. And the Swedish Chest is called, has been given this name because it was sent to Sweden by Duke Ernst II, who gave asylum to Weishaupt. And Johann Joachim Christoph Bode, who was later the informal leader of the Illuminati. So this Swedish Chest contains most of the writings of Duke Ernst II, who was a ruling prince and member of the Illuminati, and of Johann Bode, who was later the informal leader of the Illuminati. These sources are printed in these two volumes, and these volumes cover the time from 1776 to June 1783. So we see here that most of the documents on the Illuminati are not yet published. They are still in the archives. So there's a lot of work to do.
Well, perhaps you could one day get into those archives.
Yes, I think it's a little complicated because you need also permission from the Freemasonic lodges to see those archives. Maybe if I ask them very nicely, I could do it. Yeah.
Just tell them you're a blind widow's son traveling from the east to the west, or the west to the east, or yes, whatever it is.
And just very briefly on the so-called Swedish Chest that contains most of the documents. So Duke Ernst II, after his death, he had this chest sent over to the Mother Lodge, to the Masonic Mother Lodge of Sweden. Then it returned to Germany. Then it was seized by the Gestapo, by the Nazis in 1934. Then the Soviets seized it in 1945. Then the Soviets returned it to the German Democratic Republic. And after unification in 1991, it has been open to research. This is the story of those documents.
That's a rather interesting road to travel.
Yeah, and the Nazis, they were very interested in this. They were doing a Gegnerforschung, enemy research on Freemasons. This was a very important department in the SD, in the SS of the Nazis, to research Freemasonry and other groups. Alrighty, now let's, in order to understand why the Illuminati were founded by Weishaupt, we need to understand where Weishaupt comes from, how he was educated. And here we need to talk about a person called Johann von Ickstadt. So Weishaupt's father dies when Weishaupt is 5 years old. And then Johann von Ickstadt, who is his godfather, takes young Adam into his home and educates him. And Ickstadt is a leading Catholic expert in international law and a proponent of the Enlightenment. And he also becomes the educator of the Prince of Bavaria, who will later become the Elector. So this Catholic prince is not raised by Jesuits. This prince is raised by a proponent of the Enlightenment. And in 1745, this prince assumes the throne of Bavaria as Maximilian III. And Maximilian III makes his educator, Ickstadt, professor for natural law and international law in Ingolstadt. And Ickstadt then starts introducing Protestant literature, Protestant curricula, and he starts removing Jesuits from influential positions in the faculty of philosophy, medicine, and law. He doesn't manage to remove them from the faculty of theology, but he is really a pain in the neck to the Jesuits. But the problem is the faculty of theology is also the council of censorship in Bavaria. So the Jesuits, they censor the books that Ickstadt wants to publish. Then Ickstadt sends his students over to the faculty of theology, and they start heckling and harassing the Jesuit professors. And then an anonymous pamphlet appears. It's printed at the it's published. It's disseminated at the university, and Ickstadt believes that the Jesuits are behind this. And this pamphlet describes Ickstadt as an atheist who has mental illnesses and who should be hanged. And hopefully his Judengesicht, the Judengesicht of Ickstadt, the Jew face of Ickstadt, is thrown out of the university together with his minion, his Spießgeselle, Johann Weishaupt, the father of Adam Weishaupt. So this is kind of the situation at the University of Ingolstadt and the struggles, the fights between Ickstadt and the Jesuits. And mind that Adam Weishaupt visits a Jesuit college, but he is educated and raised by Ickstadt. And what he will later realize with this order of the Illuminati is really a continuation of the project of Ickstadt to push enlightenment and to kick out the Jesuits.
And surely there is at least the possibility that Ickstadt's death in 1776 and that year being the founding of the order, surely there's the possibility that that's no coincidence. I mean, it would seem that the picture you're painting is that Weishaupt basically said, my mentor has died, and now it is time for him, his dream, to live again in this formalized order. No?
Yes. So when the father is gone, then the godfather, when he's gone, then the son has to continue the project. I could also imagine that he wouldn't have dared to do this while Ickstadt was alive, because Ickstadt was a very influential political figure, and starting a secret society while his godfather was still alive, this could bring his godfather in big problems, and he would have learned about this, I'm sure.
So it's much like people's, waiting to publish people's papers until after their death, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And also Adam Weishaupt is much more radical than Ickstadt, much more radical. Okay, and now let's try to understand the context in which Weishaupt founds the Illuminati. So in 1772, 4 years before he founds the order, Weishaupt is made assistant professor for natural law and international law. And this is thanks to Ickstadt. Ickstadt makes sure his godson becomes professor. Weishaupt is only 24 years old when he becomes professor. And then something really great happens to Ickstadt and Weishaupt. The order of the Jesuits is banned by the Pope. The Pope bans the Jesuits. Because the Jesuits, before they had been kicked out of Portugal in 1759, they had been kicked out of France in 1764 because they refused to take an oath on the king. And they've been kicked out from Spain in 1767 because they had a Jesuit state in today's Paraguay. And the Spanish king said, okay, this is too much. And Portugal, France, and Spain pressure the Pope to outlaw the order. And he does so in 1773. And in this year, Weishaupt is promoted to full professor for canon law, for church law. Before, only Jesuits had this position. And now Weishaupt has this very influential, very prestigious position. Now, what changes for the Jesuits in Bavaria? The order ceases to exist, but unlike France and Portugal, the Jesuits are not kicked out of the country, but they can continue as ex-Jesuits. They must wear a civil habit. The property of the order is seized by the state, but they are still on the ground. They are still there. And it is estimated by historians that after the ban of the order, 2/3 of the teachers and professors in Bavaria were still ex-Jesuits. So although the order is banned, they are still very influential. And this creates a kind of a vacuum of power. And Weishaupt, I think he saw this and he said, okay, it's now or never. I have to move in here. And to me, Weishaupt is really, in a way, a mystery. And he's also, to me, he's the same mystery that we see in the French revolutionaries and in the Enlightenment. Because Weishaupt was educated by Jesuits. And who was also educated by Jesuits? Diderot, Voltaire, the Marquis de Sade, Robespierre, who later created the Jacobin Terror. They were all educated at the Collège Lycée Louis le Grand in Paris by Jesuits. And what has happened in this time that they become the staunchest enemies of the Jesuits? In the case of Weishaupt, we can say, well, it's the influence of Ickstadt, of his godfather. But why has Ickstadt become an enemy of the Jesuits? This is I don't know if you have an idea on this, but I find this really, really fascinating.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know enough. I'm very, very weak in terms of the rise of Protestantism, and the utopian visions and views of the remaking of the world that arose with the appearance of Protestantism, and perhaps the ways in which there was a sort of feedback from, let's call them generally Reformation ideas, back into counter-Reformation ideas. You know, if for example you take this sort of Hegelian view, that you're going to have the proposition of a thesis and then an antithesis, and then it yields a synthesis, it would seem that there would be every likelihood that some of the wilder ideas of remaking the world that appear with the movements of Reformation would have to, through that dialectical process, appear within sort of the heart of Catholicism, as it develops. So, that's why the yin yang diagram works so well with the idea of dialectical progression, because the black side has as its seed and its heart a little white dot, the white side has as its seed and its heart a little black dot, and it shows the interplay and the rotation. That's all a very, very long-winded way of saying that that it seems that there might have been that dialectical progression in place, in the sense that the emergence of the one thing couldn't help but affect everything else.
If it's true what you're saying, that there is some Hegelian dialectics at play, this would assure me very much for the present we're living in. Yes. All right. Now let's start off with the foundation of the Illuminati, which takes place on May the 1st, 1776. Now Weishaupt founds the Illuminati with 4 of his former students. And at this time, mind that he's only 28 years old. Really, really young. And he hasn't been initiated into Freemasonry or any other secret society. So he builds this from the ground up. And in order for us to get an understanding how the Illuminati communicate, how the power struggles within the order, what kind of power struggles there are inside the order, I'm going to walk you through a couple of letters that Weishaupt sent to Ajax. Ajax was the code name for one of his students, who was one of the founding members and who also became a member of the Areopagus, of the inner circle later.
And do you know anything about this business, about the Areopagus or Areopagus? This is a hill, is it not, outside of Athens? Do you know why they chose that term?
I think the Areopagus was some kind of a court, the aristocratic court. And I mean, Weishaupt just had those fancy names all over the place. I think it just sounded cool. Just like Aloysius, Munich was Athens.
So it's basically just tipping their hat to classicalism or classicisms.
Yes, yeah. And so I'm just going to walk you through those letters that Weishaupt sent to Ajax. The Ajax is the nom de guerre. His real name is Franz von Massenhausen. And these letters date from September 1776 to December 1777. So first of all, they talk about whom they recruit. And most of the candidates are students, professors, teachers, and some clergymen and some nobles here and there. And Weishaupt says the ideal candidate is 18 to 30 years old. If they are older than 40 years, we cannot mold their thinking. They are too old.
Doesn't that echo Jesuit thinking? The idea of give us the first 6 or 7 years of a child's life and you can keep the rest. I mean, that is a rather Jesuitical echo.
Yeah, the Illuminati were copying the Jesuits 100%. Like even some of the names, they are totally identical. And Weishaupt, this is really interesting. Weishaupt, he says, wir müssen die Leute abrichten. Wir müssen die Kandidaten abrichten. This is something like we have to train the candidates. But it's not like training a human being, it's like training a dog. So the German verb abrichten, this is something like you teach a dog some tricks. This is how he talks about the candidates. And he uses this word all the time. So this tells you quite a bit on Weishaupt's take on Enlightenment. And the characteristics he wants to see in candidates is that they are, and he writes this in Latin, I quote, nobiles, potentes, divites, doctus quaerite. give me or search for nobles, powerful, rich, and learned candidates. That's what he wants. And what's really good is if they can speak French or Greek, and Italian and Spanish is also good, but Greek and French is very good. He doesn't mention Latin. This is he just assumes they have to know Latin, otherwise, yeah. And very interesting, the appearance. He prefers a light physiognomy. He talks about high eyes, full of soul, elegant voice and walk. And Weishaupt actually kicked out candidates because they seemed uncouth to him or because they had an inelegant walk. And this was
based physiognomy requirements, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he said, I want the light physiognomy. Yeah, I want people who have an elegant, high voice, who have a light skin. These people will be rather shallow, but they will also be more obedient and they won't commit mutinies. So and he asks, you have to describe how he looks, his eye color, hair color, tone of his skin. He wants to know everything about the candidates. And then he tells Ajax how he shall go about recruiting the new members. So Ajax has to send him monthly reports on his candidates. And the candidates have to send a quibus licet to Weishaupt every month.
This one has been approved, or that which has been approved? What is that? Licet?
Quibus licet, to whom it may concern. Or whoever pleases, something like this. What it means is the candidate gives a sheet of paper, a sealed sheet of paper to his superior, in this case Ajax, and Ajax is not allowed to open it, but he has to send it directly to Weishaupt. And quibus licet is the same term which is used by the Jesuits. So the Jesuits, they require the new candidates to send a quibus licet to the superiors. And Weishaupt also uses the term superiors, and this is also a term the Jesuits use. So it's, as you said, it's really styled on the Jesuits. And Weishaupt then wants the candidates to write reports on other candidates who might be recruited. 3 to 4 pages. Name, position, clothing, style of walking, voice, contacts, friends, weaknesses, characteristics, everything. And Weishaupt always says, writes, lente festinando, more haste, less speed. He wants a trial period of 2 years. In this time, he wants to train the new members to understand what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths, and he really wants to create a secret school of wisdom where he creates a totally new worldview in the candidates.
And what was that Latin again?
Lente festinando.
Right, so that's straight out of the Aldus Manutius emblem of the dolphin wrapped around the anchor, which is festina lente, make haste slowly. And so that ties us back to the Italian Renaissance. It ties us back to emblems. And it also seems a rather neat summary of the whole idea of the long march through the institutions, the idea of patience and of Fabian strategy, does it not?
What do you mean by Fabian strategy?
Well, when what's his name, Hannibal, was running all over Rome, you had the idea of, I think it's Quintus Fabius, but I may have that wrong. Anyway, it was some Fabius, and hence we have the idea of a Fabian strategy. People like Marcus Furius and Columba would laugh at me right now for not knowing him off the top of my head, which general it was or which statesman. But the basic idea was they could not fight Hannibal directly. And so it was necessary for them to, basically remove, burn crops, indirectly try to stifle and slow him without directly facing him. And that became the strategic approach of the Fabian Society, named for that Roman figure. And the Fabian Society, of course, has as their emblem the wolf in sheep's clothing, and the idea of moving slowly through the institution. So this is all speculation on my part, but the theme, the association of these themes seems to be quite clear.
Yes, and I'm of the opinion that Weishaupt would have been much more successful if he had stuck to this. But later we'll see that the order takes another development, and they go into an aggressive acquisition of new members, and they grow very, very fast. And this leads to, I think, a lot of problems, and finally they are outlawed. Okay, so and after a certain trial period, after 2 years, the candidate becomes a member of the Illuminati, and he can receive the right to recruit new members. And then he will not report to Ajax, but they will all recruit directly to Weishaupt. So this is his idea, that all the new members, they report directly to him. This is a little bit like a pyramid scheme, where you structured marketing, where you recruit new members, and this member recruits also new members. And Weishaupt actually says that this is a motivation, because when you join the order, you have to be obedient, you have to carry out orders, but then everyone can build his own kingdom. That's what he says. And he wants to use this as a motivation. So in a way, you can see the Illuminati as one of the first pyramid schemes. Yes.
Yeah, and there also seems to be echoes of cell structure. It's not truly cell structure, but the idea that they had to forward physical descriptions of members to the leadership without viewing them themselves. It does seem, if I understood you correctly earlier, it does suggest that there's definitely the idea of a need to know basis. The idea that information should not be shared except in this centralized fashion. So to whatever extent it's centralized, it's obviously not cell structure, but let's say it's at least a structure intended to conceal things and limit the knowledge of people who operated in the organization to what they needed to know.
Yeah, what we're talking about here is the conception that Weishaupt has of the order. He will not be able to force the others to do this. Totally not. But in his idea, the information is gathered at the bottom, and it then is passed on upwards, and he at the top, he gets all the information. And he wants to have the other members, the other founding members, to spy on each other. He tells them, hey, I want you to spy on each other, and you send me the papers. How about that? They are not very amused, and they won't do it. But this is the conception of Weishaupt. Yeah. And he then
I guess they didn't swear oaths of obedience quite like the Jesuits, right?
Yes. Yeah, but Weishaupt, Weishaupt really saw himself as a second Loyola, and Weishaupt had a really high esteem of himself, extremely high esteem of himself. Okay, and then he tells Ajax, okay, you have to travel through Bavaria, get me new members. And I quote him, did not also Christ send his apostles out in the world? And why should I let my Peter stay at home? So here, Weishaupt makes a metaphor. Weishaupt is Christ, and Ajax is St. Peter. So we really see that Weishaupt was kind of full of himself, and he writes this to his subordinates. Yes. And so what are the readings that candidates are supposed to go through? Let me share the screen again real quick. Here we go. So one of the books that candidates had to read was The Art of Knowing Men, published 1710 by Jean-Baptiste de Bellegarde. Keep in mind, Bellegarde is a Jesuit. So here we have Weishaupt who wants to fight the Jesuits, but he has no problems using the Jesuits' denominations like quibus licet, superiors, using their structure of communication, and using their works. And this work is based on physiognomy and how you can get to know yourself and how you can get to know the characteristics, the strengths, the weaknesses of others. Is somebody trustworthy? Is somebody deceitful? And so on. Now, another book that Weishaupt, and the reason why I have this default priest here is because I wasn't able to find an image of Bellegarde. Now, another book that Weishaupt recommends to candidates is the Système Social by the Baron d'Holbach. Now, the Baron d'Holbach is an early proponent of the Enlightenment. He is an atheist, a materialist, and he criticizes absolute monarchy and the Catholic Church. And keep in mind that this book was published in 1773, 4 years before Weishaupt recommended it in his letters. So what we see here is Weishaupt is really up to date. He is a professor of law and he is an avid reader and he really knows what is happening in academia. He's really up to date. And the thesis of d'Holbach is that the Semiogogue, can you still see my screen? Can you see my video?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep, you're still
okay.
Clearly visible. Oh, now I can't. You just went dark. But
okay.
Right now you've just got the stuff up on screen with what's his name and Système Social.
Okay, no worries. I'm going to change the camera here. All right, let's continue with the Système Social. So the thesis of d'Holbach is that the corruption of morals is due to unjust government, prejudices, and wrong education. And he attacks the notion of the original sin. And this is the original sin is based on the story, and I quote, that the first father of the human race has eaten an apple. This is a bizarre origin of evil. So he really attacks not only the dogmas of the Catholic Church, but of Christianity in general. And according to him, religions were invented to make man dependent and ignorant and barbaric. And this is totally in line with the materialist worldview of the Illuminati and of Adam Weishaupt, because the Illuminati were very much unlike the Rosicrucians. They were against mysticism and they were for enlightenment and for reason. Okay. Now I'm afraid that my camera went off. Let me see if I can fix that.
No worries. You're still clearly audible. So I'll just fill the screen with me for the moment. Everybody can watch me dancing around.
Okay.
So no worries. It does occur to me while you're working on that this is a very, very interesting point, and I don't want it to disappear. It should be marked. We should, as they say, stick a pin in it or a flag. And this is this point that, unlike the Rosicrucians, they have turned away from the idea of mysticism. And that is a major, major point. I mean, of course, we see this with the Enlightenment, but now we have the idea that this is happening within secret societies, which are all about esoteric knowledge and the rest. And this sort of marks I guess, a significant point where you see the Enlightenment reflected in the secret societies, the disappearance of mysticism, which we can consider a kind of vertical axis of the spiritual. And so with the disappearance of the vertical axis of the spiritual and the idea of mysticism, well, you have the stage set for materialism and the idea of, human progress and all of the rest that has become such a central theme of everything having to do with progress. So, this seems an important thing to stick a pin in and to remember, because now we see the point at which secret societies are themselves the point at which secret societies have become materialist, and that seems to be something quite significant.
Yeah, very much so, and it's you can also see it as a very early sign of what will later be channeled into the Marxist, the communist movement. And also during the French Revolution, you have for instance, Robespierre, he's not really an atheist. He installs the cult of the Supreme Being, which is kind of a deist, Freemasonic version of God. But then you also have figures around the conspiracy of equals. The name of the leader escapes me. But they are really seen as, they are really proto-communists. They are atheists and they want to get rid of private property in France and give it to everyone. Now that we get back to the Illuminati, I must say my camera is dead. But I think we can continue just like this. I think the audience hears me well.
Yes, and also, even if your camera is dead, you may well be able to share your screen if you have further things that you want to show as visual support.
Sure. Okay, so we continue with Ajax and Adam Weishaupt. And now that Adam Weishaupt was in high hopes and he wanted to send his St. Peter, his Ajax, around Bavaria, he now realizes that Ajax has not been as diligent as he wanted. So first of all, he writes to him, "You have sent me a totally useless manuscript on necromancy," because Weishaupt was collecting writings on how to install a mystic initiation. And Ajax recommended necromancy to him, and Weishaupt says, "Your letter isn't even worth the stamp." And then he says that, "I don't believe you. I don't believe that you have recruited new members. I think you are lying to me. You're being lazy. You are not finishing your law degree, while I, Weishaupt, am a professor, a rector of the university, and I'm running this secret society, and you should go ahead and finish your law degree." He then continues, this is a quote, "I must confess that I am entitled by our nexus to tell you that I am not satisfied with you at all. You let me write letters and arrange an endless amount of matters, while I receive not one single answer from you. It seems you do whatever pleases you. Fair enough. It is still possible to let the whole matter rest, lest I be faced with prostitution or even danger. It is all nothing, and I am thankful for being a co-worker. I am, by the way, thy humble servant, Spartacus." So here is a constant pattern that Weishaupt is criticizing the members for laziness, and also that he's threatening to leave the order. Of course, he doesn't want to leave the order. He just uses this as pressure. But what we can see here is that there are definitely problems. There are definitely power struggles at play within the order. And Weishaupt is also, it's a little too much for him. He's a professor. He just founded this secret society. He's only 28 years old. He doesn't really know what he's doing because it's the first time he's doing it. So this is quite interesting. And now we continue with another batch of letters, which were sent by Weishaupt to Zwack. So Zwack was the person at which there was a house search. Here he and Zwack also becomes a member of the inner circle of the Areopagus, and here Weishaupt complains about Ajax to Zwack, and he writes, Ajax has acted so arbitrarily in this matter that I am not surprised you find yourself at a total loss. We will need a good deal of time to bring matters in order again. Do not cease frequenting him, but make sure to visit him more diligently as before. Do not, however, discuss important matters with him, but deceive him in the same way he deceived us. This man has damaged our cause in terms of people and money, which will throw us back 2 or 3 years in these regions. So again, we have another constant pattern in Weishaupt, in that he tries to set one member off against the other. Divide et impera. This is really the tactic Weishaupt uses to have control over his order. And Weishaupt then says that he regrets that he cannot expel Ajax because he's one of the founding members and he knows about everything. And this is also a problem of a secret society. So once you let someone in, once somebody knows everything about the society, you can't really just say like, okay, you're fired. You either have to kill him or you have to let him stay a member of the society. What else are you going to do?
Notwithstanding the exchange that we read through at the beginning, that where they talked all nicely about how they would always follow the order. Yes, these troublesome people who don't obey. Yes, always yes. Trouble.
And then after Weishaupt has complained to Zwack about Ajax, he continues to complain that Zwack is also lazy, and he says he hasn't received the character descriptions of the new members. And also he complains that all the documents are in Munich. So Zwack and the other leading members of the inner circle, they are based in Munich, and they are running the archive, and they are also in control of the funds. And Weishaupt says that this doesn't make any sense. So these letters are just to satisfy their curiosity, or even worse, they would use these letters to pressure other members and to impose a, quote, despotism. And Weishaupt then writes, I have to regard myself as your handyman. How on earth shall I be the leader of this cause? And he demands that all the letters are sent to him, that a central archive is set up in Ingolstadt, that the funds are moved to Ingolstadt, and that regional archives are created in Eichstätt, Ravensburg, and Freising, and in Munich. New members have to write directly to their superiors and to Weishaupt, and that the members of the inner circle have to write reports about each other and send them to Weishaupt. You can imagine that the leading members of the inner circle, that they were not really interested in doing all this.
Yeah, he seems to be setting himself up to be purged by his own inner circle.
Yes, so in the end, the Areopagus takes a collective decision, and they decide, okay, the archive and the funds remain in Munich, and Weishaupt then grudgingly accepts. I mean, what can he do? And now let's talk about the religion, if you will, of the Illuminati. Although they were anti-religious, they tried to give themselves a mystic order in order to initiate people into mysteries. Because at this time, with Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians, you had to have a mystical touch to your society. Semiogogue, could I share my screen here?
Yes, but I do not at present see it. So whatever you did last time, you're going to have to do for me to.
Let
me pull down the one that I did have.
Let me share it again. Here we go. Do you see it now?
Oh, yeah, yes, great. I do. Excellent.
Okay. So Weishaupt is working feverishly on a mystery for his order, into which new members can be initiated. So Weishaupt writes, "For this reason, I give long periods between initiations which can, once a system has been established, be reduced. One expects much in such secret societies, and how could I, at my age of 30 years, satisfy this?" So this is what he writes again to Zwack, and then he proposes to use the Zoroastrian mysteries and use chemical and electrical techniques. So what he wants to do is he wants to buy a house, set up a fire initiation with a temple that is put under electricity from all sides. And he wants to install hidden machines in order to impress the initiates. And he continues, "You may wonder what I am up to. I want to revive the old system of the Parsis, and you shall recognize its grandeur and highness. It will be new to all and incite astonishment." So we already know that the calendar that the Illuminati use is the Persian calendar. And now Weishaupt wants to use Persian mysticism, the religion of Zoroaster. And Weishaupt had just read a translation of the Zend-Avesta, of the holy book of the Zoroastrians, because this book was just translated from Persian into French in 1771. Again, Weishaupt being totally up to date, and Weishaupt writing openly that he wants to use this to deceive new members. And
so straight from the outset, if I understand this correctly, the whole point here is to give them some mystical, superficial bullshit to keep them interested, because the understanding is that any secret society must offer some woo-woo bullshit like this in order to keep everyone excited. Am I understanding this correctly?
Absolutely, that's the idea.
And what's very interesting about this is the idea of Persians, because how do I say this quickly? The basic idea, there are a lot of people who talk about Muslims and the idea of taqiyya, or permissible dissimulation. And, they'll talk about it with Sunni and the rest. But the reality is that in the Muslim world, the idea of taqiyya is much more associated with Persians, much more associated with Shiite minorities that have to continue to operate within the larger cultural context of religious believers who think that they're the bad guys, right? So the Shiites have to be able to continue to operate within areas that are primarily Sunni, and they do so through religious dissimulation. And this is a very, very old Persian idea. People who've been following my channel for a while have probably heard me mention in the past that I was looking into the origins of this idea of taqiyya. And there's Kitman, there's Tauriya, there's also, Taqiyya, and probably a couple others thrown in terms of ways in which Muslims are permitted to lie and that sort of thing. And they made their way into Sunni belief. But there's a key aspect of this that's present in the Persian traditions. And I got in touch with some Baha'is who were interested in this sort of thing, a particular Baha'i woman who'd been researching the idea of taqiyya, and she had looked at it going back into Persian culture. And she pointed out that in the early days, what Cyrus the Great would do, he would come in and instead of getting rid of another group's religions as the king who conquered them, he would simply insert himself quite opportunistically into their pantheon, so that he would just, rather than getting rid of their religion, they would just modify it slightly so that he would be included. You can see the way in which the Romans, created or expanded the imperial cult so that the emperor became a god. The conniving, sort of cunning idea of shaping the religion in order to shape the beliefs and behaviors of believers, so that you would get them better under control. And this is something very interesting to see here, because we're seeing that same sort of opportunistic scamming, but we're seeing it in the context, literally, of Persians. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to point out here. I mean, you could even argue, and we're getting far afield here, so I'll shut up in a second, but you could even argue that the Baha'i faith is really little more than sort of taking basic Persian ideas of religion that go back to Zoroaster, certainly, that survived in Shiism with their imamate. Baha'ism is just sort of a way to make basic Persian religious beliefs universal and global, and to strip what they could of the specific cultural aspects to increase the uptake around the world. The Baha'i religion is of recent vintage, and it's growing rapidly around the world. Oddly, there's the central Baha'i temple is in Israel. But anyway, just a little sidebar on this idea of looking at the Persian religion and using it opportunistically as a sort of mystical focus. All the while, as we discussed earlier, this is an organization that looks down on mysticism and moves straight for the Enlightenment. So there's definitely more of this wolf in sheep's clothing aspect. And Antaios, are you still with us? Hopefully I don't have you muted. No, it doesn't appear I do. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we lost Antaios. Hopefully he will be back momentarily. Let me look through here. Maybe he'll drop in and out. Yeah, it looks like he just dropped out of the stream, so I expect him to be back in just a moment. Let me take a look here and see if we have any questions or anything that I can address at this point. For some reason, we got some sort of webcam dickhead coming through here. Hopefully the moderators will catch that. I appreciate the moderators in the house, by the way. I saw Mr. Ixme is here, hopefully still. And I think I saw Fiend J in the house. There we go. It looks like Antaios is back.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir.
All righty, great.
But we lost your screen that you had been sharing.
Sure, I'm going to share that again. And it's definitely interesting that there is this overlap between the Baha'i religion and the Illuminati in the way that religions are shaped, reshaped, instrumentalized. And we are going to see another example of this, of course, here with Greek antiquity, with the Eleusinian mysteries. Here Weishaupt takes a book by Christoph Meiners. I'm afraid it has the wrong, I inserted the wrong title. The title is Miscellaneous Philosophical Writings. It's not a social system. And it's also from 1776. So this is a book by a university professor of Göttingen, Christoph Meiners, who later also becomes a member of the Illuminati. And here Meiners describes the mystery cults of antiquity. And this is the inspiration, another inspiration for Adam Weishaupt. And Weishaupt recommends to Zwack to read this book. but to keep it safe from the others, to not tell the others about it. And what I did, I just had a look at this book and I read through it, and I then realized what Weishaupt had in mind here. And I'm going to give a quote from Christoph Meiners's book. Most mysteries were celebrated at night for many reasons, of which the following was arguably the most natural and most important. All theatrical displays leave the greatest impression and the deepest deceit if the scene itself draws attention through illumination of lamps or candles, while the beholder is placed at a dark corner and separated from the remaining world through walls. All kinds of machines are employed in corners and corridors of the temples that the beholder did not know, so that even a sharp eye could not discover the hidden game of the priests. And Meiners then continues to describe the Eleusinian mysteries. He says that priests had sacred texts, and they would only accept members after a long time of probation. And finally, the members would be initiated, and this would lead into an enlightenment of the soul. So something that Socrates also talks about in the dialogue Phaedo. And then there are the smaller mysteries, which are for the masses, where the masses of the people still believe in polytheism. But the greater mysteries, they are for the lawmakers, the statesmen, and the heroes. And here the initiates are taught that there is only one God. And Weishaupt wants either to use the Zoroastrian mysteries or the Eleusinian mysteries to dupe new members. So how enlightened does this sound to you, Semiogogue?
Well, cynical and power hungry and cunning. Certainly, it tends to reflect the central theme of light and darkness, the way they use the theater of it, and to shroud things in darkness and use sources of illumination and that sort of thing. But yeah, it just seems rather cunning and cynical. I mean, this is really the point at which you could see the worldliness and the rest with the Rosicrucians and the likelihood that there were spies involved, and it was fighting between new Protestant groups and the Habsburg Catholic powers. And, you could see that there was this realpolitik aspect to it, but it's really with the arrival of the Illuminati and the quote unquote Enlightenment that you really see it get cynical and materialist. So yeah, it's, it really seems to set the stage for everything that we see that comes afterwards.
And what I find fascinating is that it tells you also so much about the French Revolution. And I mean, the saying, the revolution eats its own children. This is also an example that it just, that all those Enlightenment thinkers and the revolutionaries, they have this very high, they are riding on very high horses. They have this notion, we are fighting for the good, we are fighting the evil, we are there to liberate the people, and while liberating the people, they're massacring, they're killing hundreds of thousands. For example, the wars in the Vendée against the counter-revolutionaries, where you have people like Marat and Robespierre lament that not more women and kids were killed. So the cynicism is really there, and we wonder what would have happened if the Illuminati had seized power in the Holy Roman Empire, for instance. If they had carried out the French Revolution in Germany, if that had happened, how would that have looked like? But of course, this is speculation, and let us continue with.
We have to ask ourselves where we've seen this sort of thing before, with elites who claim to know better than we do, and who are perfectly happy to, from their high horse, make determinations about how we're all going to live. But sorry about that. Please go on.
Yeah, trust the plan. Move along. Nothing to see here. Okay. Now let us continue. Now the order goes into its second phase, and the idea of using Zoroastrianism or the Eleusinian mysteries is dropped, because now enter the stage Adolf Freiherr von Knigge, a very well-connected Freemason who joins the order in 1780.
I'm sorry, I have to do an AA thing here and say, "What's up, my Knigge?" Sorry. Sorry, go on.
And in 1780, the Illuminati have infiltrated 2 lodges in Bavaria. As I mentioned, in 1777, Weishaupt joins a lodge in Munich. 2 years later, he receives the master grade. And they, one of the lodges, they have infiltrated it, and they start creating filial lodges all over Bavaria. But at this moment, they are like 80 members, and they are really restricted to Bavaria. But with Knigge, everything changes. In June 1780, Knigge becomes a member of the Illuminati and at the same time a member of the Areopagus, of the inner circle. Usually, according to Weishaupt's plan, you have to wait 2 years to even become a member, and then maybe you might join the Areopagus. But with Knigge, they see this guy is gold. We have to promote him very fast. We need him. And first of all, Knigge is in contact with the Areopagites, but then Weishaupt tells him, okay, the superiors told me you have to correspond with me from now on. So Weishaupt tells him the superiors have decided you have to contact me. Of course, he is a superior. I mean, there's deceit everywhere. Anyway, now Weishaupt is in contact with Knigge, and he doesn't let anyone else know about this. And Knigge tells Weishaupt that at the moment, Freemasonry is in a crisis. Because there were a lot of worshipful masters, a lot of leaders in Freemasonry who claimed a background, who claimed that they were dating back to some lodge in Scotland or to the Knights Templar. And then people did research and they found out, oh, this lodge in Scotland never existed. So at this time, a lot of Freemasons are really disaffected and they are looking for something else. And Knigge writes to Weishaupt, who has a monopoly on Freemasonry? Who can stop the current anarchy? Now is the time to write a book that true Masonry is seated in Munich and to discredit all others. What the Jesuits are to you, the German Rosicrucians are to me. Since I refuse to join them, they are watching me closely. Those Rosicrucians are recruiting a lot, and I have problems wrenching candidates from their throats. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, there is another secret society, the Rosicrucians, and they are recruiting a lot of members from the ranks of the Freemasons. And in order to discredit the Jesuits and the Rosicrucians, Knigge, as he said in this letter, publishes a book under a pseudonym, anonymously. And this book is called On Jesuits, Freemasons, and German Rosicrucians. And it is published in 1781. And here so the book is divided in 3 parts. The first part on the Jesuits. Here he says that the Jesuits claim to have power to dethrone the kings. The Jesuits are behind the gunpowder plot in England, the murder of the French king Charles IV, And although they are banned by the Pope, they are still influential in Bavaria. They occupy high offices, and they enjoy high esteem among the population. The second part is a letter by a Freemason to a friend. And here the Freemason writes to this friend that Freemasonry is not a political tool, and that nothing of great importance, nothing is really taught in Freemasonry, that only a spark is set up in each member. And only one German lodge is in contact with true Freemasonry. All the other lodges are corrupted. And he then also gives a justification of secret societies. And he writes, we can, therefore, think of a secret society that had truly political motives and that would not only not be dangerous, but, given the current corruption, be a blessing to humanity. So what he does here, he in a way says, yes, Freemasonry is really boring and they have nothing to offer, but there's one lodge in Munich, there's one lodge in Germany which has true Freemasonry. And even if there is a secret society, then this wouldn't be a problem. Even if it had political goals, it wouldn't be a problem. And he is indirectly rooting and preparing people for the Illuminati.
And just a quick question. I'm sorry to jump in, but I'm very curious. Tell me again. You mentioned the date at which he is inducted into when von Knigge is inducted into the Illuminati. What is that date relative to the date of publication of this?
June 1780, and this book was published in 1781. So I don't know whether it's in January or December 1781, but it's probably a year in between.
So it clearly looks like he was brought in, and then he went to work publishing to further these views and aims.
Yes, he was very, very active, very motivated.
And one quick... sorry, go on.
No.
I just wanted to ask also about the Rosicrucians. You know, it's interesting to me that they are referred to as still operating at this date. And did I understand you correctly? That's what his book is remarking upon. He's saying that they're still around.
They are operating. In 1750, some Freemasons found the so-called Order of the Golden Crucians and the Rosicrucians. They are around. They are recruiting like crazy at this moment. Of course, they are not the real Rosicrucians. They say they are the real Rosicrucians. They say they can make gold. They say they can get in contact with spirits and everything.
And do you have any sense of what the political aims, if any, of the Rosicrucians at this stage are? Simply because we talked about this in our last stream. So, you know, to see them appear again roughly 100 years later is interesting. And I sort of wonder what it is they're up to at this point, if indeed it's the same organization.
The Rosicrucians, at this time, they are definitely anti-Enlightenment. I don't know their position on monarchy, but they are definitely against the Enlightenment. They are mystic, they are alchemical, they have magical rituals. In 1781, the same year that this book was published, the King of Prussia joins the Rosicrucians. And before, some Rosicrucians, they duped him in a grotto. They installed a hidden Laterna Magica. They showed the image of Emperor Marcus Aurelius and a ventriloquist was talking to the Prussian king, and the ventriloquist was talking like Marcus Aurelius. And then these Rosicrucians, they are promoted through the ranks in Prussia. They are nobled and everything.
Wow. So we could at least say that it seems that very likely that the Rosicrucians of this period, at a minimum, are considered to be competitors of the Illuminati, if not outright opponents or enemies.
They are outright opponents, and this is exactly what Mirabeau writes on the Prussian monarchy. He writes that there are the Rosicrucians, and he writes the only time the Rosicrucians get in contact with Freemasonry is to become their masters, is to infiltrate them.
Very interesting. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay. Yeah. Let's continue with the book published by Knigge. So if we just take a look at the screenshot on the right side, you see the red bar, and this is page 20 of the book. And he writes about a sect of the Illuminati. This is the first time that the Illuminati are mentioned in public. I really don't understand why he, as a member of the Illuminati, mentions his own sect in public. I assume that it was with the consent of Weishaupt. Maybe it was to kind of prime the audience that this exists somewhere, to make people interested. But at the same time, why would you write the name of your secret society in public? It is a mystery to me, but it is very, very interesting that this is in this book.
Well, certainly if you're in a situation where you're competing, and you want to draw attention and to have a name for yourself, some kind of advertisement, after a fashion would seem to be indicated. If nobody knows you exist, then and you just mentioned earlier that there are many people showing up claiming to be members of Masonic lodges that aren't there, and we also talked about how there was a great buzz created with the Rosicrucians themselves, with the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz or whatever. They very effectively used promotion of themselves as a secret order when, it seems, back at that date, the Rosicrucians perhaps didn't even truly exist at that point. So we can already see a tradition where a mystical order that maybe doesn't exist creates a huge buzz across the entire continent, with all kinds of learned men seeking them out. And now, as you just mentioned, we're in a situation where the Rosicrucians appear to be there and would appear to be competitors or opponents. And, the Illuminati would want to capture some of the market, so to speak, for these mystical societies. I mean, you were just talking about how the Illuminati is searching around to find some kind of scaffolding or framework to use as a way to make themselves seem like true mystics. So this would seem to be promotion, advertising, as it were. Of course, I'm just guessing.
And of course, in the domain of mysticism, the Rosicrucians were a strong competitor, because they were based on magic, on alchemy, on contacting spirits, and all those things. And Knigge then writes of the Rosicrucians that they are a perversion of the Enlightenment, that they dupe people into making them believe they could make gold or contact spirits, and that they are infiltrating Freemasonry and perverting it with their mystic speculations. So this really sets the stage for the Illuminati to take on not only the Rosicrucians, but to infiltrate Freemasonry. And Knigge then recommends that the Illuminati imitate Masonic grades in order to gain the prestige of the Freemasons. And then the Zoroastrian and Eleusinian mysteries are dropped, and Weishaupt and Knigge start creating grades, and these grades introduce an organizational hierarchy. They give instruction on the duties of new members, and they also determine the rituals of the initiation, and they inform the candidates about the goals of the order. Of course, this is graded. At the beginning, not much information will be revealed, but as you progress through the ranks, you will learn more about the aims of the order. And in 1782, Knigge and Weishaupt are done with the first system, and they imitate high-grade Freemasonry, where they still retain their 3 initial grades, but on top they add 3 more grades called the Directing Illuminati, the Priest, and the Regent. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Directing Illuminati here. This is the 4th grade. And Knigge inserts an allusion to the Scottish Knight. The Scottish Knight is a grade in Freemasonry. And here, in the ritual of initiation, a Last Supper is served by the initiator. And this is introduced by Knigge and by Weishaupt without waiting for feedback. And the problem is that many members in Catholic regions are outraged because they think this is something which belongs in church only. And it is absolutely not okay to have a non-priest perform this ritual. And another member from Göttingen, a Protestant member, writes that this is jouer la religion. He writes in French, this term. He says, this is playing religion. This is not serious. This is ridiculous. And he'd rather stay at his current grade. He does not want to take this new grade. Now, Weishaupt is furious, and he stops the initiations in Bavaria, or they change the initiations in Bavaria. So there are different initiations in Catholic regions and in Protestant regions. And then Weishaupt decides, okay, we're going to scrap the grades of Knigge. Weishaupt comes up with a new grade where he replaces the supper with a narration about Jesus of Nazareth, where he says that the true teaching of Jesus was to set man free through reason and to put an end to the rule of man by man. And this can be seen in every part of the Bible. This is the new grade that Adam Weishaupt introduces. And he refers to... Yes?
I was just going to say, this is very interesting in terms of what we've seen, subsequently. Of course, we, take a look at, for example, liberation theology, right? The idea of coming in and reinterpreting the meaning of the foundational texts in order to seize the associated authority. And that is something that we see going back in all kinds of ways back through history. You have the idea of pseudographia. You have the idea of the dissimulation, the taqiyya that we mentioned earlier, going back to that idea the Baha'i woman mentioned to me of not removing the religion, simply inserting yourself into the pantheon. And so pseudographia sort of fits in that sense, where you have, for example, some great historical figure known to be authoritative, you simply pen the work and then put it in their name, so it's believed that they actually wrote it. And then you've got a situation where the belief is that it's coming from this authority and therefore you should accept it. And then, of course, we see that same theme being carried out in terms of linguistic manipulations. So you see the focus on speech and language with political correctness and the remaking of terms and the coining of new phrases and terms that have to be used, so that you must refer to people in this way and not in this way. And it all becomes very, very arbitrary. You have fundamentally the idea that you can remake society by sort of shifting around which definitions are associated with which words, and you will remake society itself. So you have the theme of pseudographia, of inserting yourself into a pantheon, of dissimulation of various kinds, and then sort of splitting straight down the middle between the signifier and the signified. And you end up with this idea of a socially constructed reality. So it's or socially constructed identity and beliefs. It's very interesting how all these pieces knit together, and we can so clearly see them with the Illuminati themselves. Are you still with us, Antaios, since we lost your screen?
I am, and it is exactly as you say. For Weishaupt, it is very important to paint a picture that the Illuminati go back a long, long way. This is why the other Freemasons were claiming that they are derived from the Knights Templar. Some even say that they are derived from King Solomon. The Rosicrucians claim that they are derived from Adam, that they continue the teachings of Adam, the first man, Adam and Eve. And what Weishaupt is doing here, and this is really a great move, he interprets the Bible in a way that is in harmony with the ideas of the Enlightenment. Jesus said, and faith will set you free. So this is something which will not be offensive to religious members. And it will also, and it won't be too mystical to proponents of the Enlightenment. And Weishaupt lets the initiate know in these initiations that the true teaching of Jesus was corrupted, but secret societies like the Knights Templar and the Freemasons carried forth this knowledge, and now the Illuminati carry on the secret true meaning of Jesus Christ.
If I can jump in here, we saw with our first real episode, I mean, there's, of course, the first episode is sort of an introduction and overview, but episode 2 in this series, we discussed the Florentine Neoplatonists and the whole idea of Hermeticism, right? So we had the fact that Cosimo de' Medici on his deathbed told Marsilio Ficino to hurry up and finish translating the Corpus Hermeticum, the collection of Hermetic documents, more quickly than the Platonic ones, because he wanted to read before he died, or have read to him before he died, the Hermetic works, because at that time they were believed to be older and more authentic. And so you had the idea, as we talked about before, of the Prisci Theology. So the idea was that, Hermeticism was so old that it was the original teaching. And we can't get into it in detail here, but as we talked about, I think then the basic idea was the Hermetic works actually came after Christ. And so it was natural that many Christian ideas appeared in them. But because at that time they believed that Hermes Trismegistos was so much older, so much, deeper back in history than these later prophets and even Christ himself, he was seen as prefiguring Christ's teachings. And it was all because of a misunderstanding, because they thought these documents were older. And in that way, Hermetic ideas were introduced into Christian ideas in the Italian Renaissance and survived for quite some time. Now, I bring this all up because in the beginning of the 17th century with Isaac Casaubon, he came in and based on linguistic evidence, and evidence associated with the surviving texts, he said, look, the kind of Greek that these people were using at this time isn't ancient Greek. It's probably from I don't remember what it was, but probably, 4th century AD or something. And so they said, hey, wait a minute. actually all these ancient documents that we thought were the oldest come from after the fact, and that explains why we see these things reflected there. It's not that they were prefigured, it's that they were post facto. Now, I bring this up because by the 18th century that we're talking about now, the original ideas of Casaubon revealing that the Hermetic documents weren't that old, they must have become well known to these people at this point. And so they doubtless could have been able to look, or I believe at least, that there's a very good chance that they would have been well aware of this misunderstanding by this time and have sort of reverse engineered it and said, well, why don't we do it on purpose instead of having it happen accidentally? Just something I wanted to throw in there. And also, Antaios, we did lose your screen with your illustrations. I don't know if you turned that off on purpose, but if you still have the visual aids, I'd love to put them up.
Alrighty. Yep, I can put them on again.
Just far more interesting than my ugly face just sitting here listening to you, you know.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, in these times, it was really different from today. Today, we would say the newer the better, but the Illuminati were really struggling with the fact that they were such a young organization, and all those other lodges, they were 20, 30, 50, 100 years, not 100, but maybe 50 years older than them. And they had to cope with that. And then Weishaupt's grades are applied, and Knigge's grades are revoked. And Weishaupt writes to Knigge, you have to stop initiations in Frankfurt and in Western Germany. And Knigge says, how can I do that? I told everybody these are the grades. And Weishaupt tells him, tell everybody your grades were a forgery. Now we are going to use my grades. So Knigge was absolutely pissed. But the new grades that are introduced by Weishaupt, they have a very good impact, and people like them a lot. And Weishaupt then writes, I quote, the most wonderful thing is that great Protestant and Reformed theologians of the order believe that the religious instructions contain the true and real spirit of the Christian religion. Oh, humans, how easy are you convincible? I had not thought that I would become the founder of a new religion. Here again, you see that Weishaupt is quite full of himself, but I think also he made a very good move with this new rite. Yes.
And a quick question, do we know what the names of these initiatory grades were in the Knigge system and the one of Weishaupt's? Like, because very often the names that they use for the grades will reveal the mythos, the ethos, the context, the structure that they're trying to impose.
So the higher grades were directing Illuminati, priest, and regent.
And those are the Weishaupt ones?
No, those were the Knigge and the Weishaupt ones, but the content was changed.
And how do you mean the content was changed? They kept the same names, but they corresponded to something different? Or what do you mean?
Yeah, so Knigge used a Freemasonic version of the Last Supper for the directing Illuminati. And Weishaupt replaced this with the narrative of Jesus, that the true teaching of Jesus is to spread freedom and to end rule of man over man.
Yeah, it sure does sound like the kind of things that you hear from like leftists on Twitter, where they come in and they try to shame Christians or whatever, and they'll be like, well, if you were a real Christian, you'd be a social justice warrior like I am, because that's really what Christ. Yeah, same thing, different day.
Yeah, Jesus would have been LGBTQ. Okay, so Knigge at this moment is really pissed, and he writes to Weishaupt, I see coming the total destruction of the order, in which so little manly firmness is found. I am sorry for your grace, having had such high intentions. So we really see that Weishaupt and Knigge are not the best friends any longer. But Knigge will continue at the order for another year. And he really gets going. He recommends that the Illuminati should either infiltrate or cooperate with the so-called Rite of Strict Observance. And the Rite of Strict Observance was a Masonic rite in Germany that was the most influential at that time. And they had many members. Among many of the members were high princes. So Knigge was absolutely right in saying we need to control the Rite of Strict Observance. Then we are going to take over Freemasonry in Germany. And he actually says, I quote, then we would be masters of the whole of Freemasonry. The Rite of Strict Observance was founded in 1764 by a German nobleman who claimed that he received mysteries in France from a Scottish lodge that descends from the Knights Templar. So later people found out that this was all made up and the Scottish lodge did not exist. And this order also, this rite also promised its members an initiation into mysteries. But these initiations never took place. So at this time, Freemasonry was in a crisis. People were saying, okay, I'm going to leave this. There were conventions about how to reform the Rite of Strict Observance. And Knigge said, okay, we have to move fast now. The Rosicrucians already have their agents in this Rite of Strict Observance, and we have to be faster than them. And what happens now? Now, Knigge has at this moment recruited around 500 members. This is more than 1/3 of the total members of the Illuminati. But Knigge recruits yet another person, Joachim Christoph Bode, who will later become the de facto leader of the Illuminati after Weishaupt has fled. And Bode is very well connected within the Rite of Strict Observance, a Masonic grade system within German Freemasonry. And Bode then goes on to recruit Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He recruits Duke Karl August of Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach. This Duke is very influential because all the important thinkers like Schiller, Fichte, Goethe, later Hegel, and Herder, they are all at his court. So he's really his court is the intellectual center of Germany. Bode continues to recruit Duke Ernest II of Saxe-Gotha, who will later grant asylum to Weishaupt. He will recruit Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick, who is a ruling prince and who is the Grand Master of the Rite of Strict Observance. He goes on to recruit Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, who is also a Freemason and who is the second leading person in the Rite of Strict Observance. So in 1783, the Illuminati have among their ranks ruling princes. The most famous German writer. However, this is not just positive because some of the princes, like Ferdinand of Brunswick, says that he is not interested in the political goals of the order, that Freemasonry and secret societies should accept should accept the rulers, that they shouldn't change everything, that they shouldn't go too far with enlightenment. And this, of course, creates a huge problem for Knigge and for Bode, because now, because all these dukes and princes, they were recruited without the knowledge of Weishaupt, and Weishaupt says, no, this is going too far. Knigge, we cannot go on and promote Bode, who just went on a recruiting spree, recruiting all kinds of ruling princes.
And let me make, I'm sorry, just let me make sure I understand this correctly. These people, so when you talk about, for example, Goethe, these people joined the Illuminati itself, or they joined Masonic orders that at this point were fronts for the Illuminati? I'm sorry, I didn't follow that part.
No,
I think
they joined the Illuminati
itself. Okay.
Yes,
So,
yes.
And when they talk about the political goals of the Illuminati, you discussed earlier the way in which it was, bringing freedom to all men and Enlightenment ideals and getting rid of mysticism and the rest. And they're very sort of Machiavellian about it. Can you tell us anything more about the specific political goals in this context that people like the Brunswick fellow, the Duke or whatever he was, and others reacted to? Were these new lords who had been brought into the organization, were they reacting just generally to this idea of enlightenment and making men happy but first making them good, or were they reacting to more specific things in their political context?
It is mixed. So if we look at Duke Ernest II, he was a radical proponent of the Enlightenment. He actually writes to Bode that he sees that there is there's anti-monarchical tendencies within the Illuminati. But he says, I am myself a member of this group, and I assure you there are good members like me, and I want to work for these goals. So it is really astonishing. This Duke Ernest seems to identify with also with the political goals of the order, which is really, I cannot understand it. And later he takes the Illuminati really go to his court. Later he grants asylum to Adam Weishaupt. He gives him a government position. He lets Weishaupt publish all his books where he justifies himself. But then there are other figures, for instance, Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick. He was very happy to be the Grand Master of the rite of strict observance, because through this he could control Freemasonry, and and under him the rite of strict observance was really a club of noblemen and of princes that was not at all interested in revolution.
But we certainly we see this sort of thing with later figures, like I think it was Prince Kropotkin, who's a proponent of anarchism. The idea that you have these aristocrats who are very much behind some of these radical social changes. I mean, that's very much a part of the French Revolution as well. I remember when you were speaking with JF about that, you were talking about the many noblemen of the time who came over, so to speak, to the side of the revolutionaries. So it's interesting to see it reflected here as well.
Sure. For instance, Adolf Freiherr von Knigge was also a nobleman, but he was of low nobility. But if we have, for instance, Duke Ernst of Saxe-Gotha, he is a ruling prince. So I asked myself, why would he be interested in joining such an order and identifying with the ideas, though they are to his detriment, though they are questioning the legitimacy of his rule? It is really, I think, a mystery, and we see this also play out in France, where the Duke of Orléans, the cousin of the king, becomes the leader of the revolution. who protects Freemasons and the Jacobins, and who takes the vote that his cousin, the king, should be executed. Well, anyway, so at this situation, the order of the Illuminati has made huge progress. So they have infiltrated a lot of Masonic lodges. In Bavaria, they control the University of Ingolstadt, and through this, they also control the Council of Censorship. So at this moment, they are censoring Jesuit books, and they are publishing and books which are about the Enlightenment. They are publishing this like crazy, and they're censoring the Jesuits.
Must be nice, you know? We see the same thing, the idea of elite capture. We see the same thing, the long march through the institution, gaining control of the universities, and the ability to censor, which is used so effectively by people today.
Yes. And they are in control of some capitulas, of some churches. They have taken over former Jesuit schools, so-called gymnasium, these high schools. They've taken them over in Bavaria, and they are now at the top of the game. They are connected to Freemasonry, and they are infiltrating the lodges, and it is really at this point where you would say everything is going well that things start going south. Because, at this moment, they have kicked out, in 1784, they have kicked out Knigge, who built up the Illuminati, who recruited 500 members, who told them how they can infiltrate the rite of strict observance. And he says that he is bent on revenge. He writes this to Weishaupt. We have members like Ferdinand of Brunswick, who is not really enthusiastic about the political goals. You also have ex-members of the Illuminati who are Rosicrucians. It happened that some Rosicrucians joined the Illuminati, but then they either left the Illuminati or they were kicked out because the Illuminati found out, hey, you're a member of the Rosicrucians. You didn't tell us about that. So please leave your order, leave the Rosicrucians. And they say, no, we don't. Okay, we leave. Bye-bye. Will you keep secrecy? Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will keep secrecy. Bye-bye. So at this moment, too many people know about it. And remember that Adolf Knigge had also mentioned the Illuminati here in published writing. So at this moment, the Bavarian authorities learn about the Illuminati. And in 1784, they outlaw all secret societies. And in 1785, they specifically outlaw the Illuminati in Bavaria. Sorry, I didn't find a better copy for the second one. And the Bavarian authorities impose the death penalty on anyone who continues recruiting new members. And it is at this time that Weishaupt flees from Ingolstadt. So imagine, he's just been teaching as a professor in Ingolstadt. From one day to the other, Weishaupt is gone. Where's Weishaupt? Weishaupt first flees to Regensburg, a free imperial city, and then he flees to the court of Duke Ernest of Saxe-Gotha. So this court is right here. This is where Weishaupt takes his asylum.
And just a quick question in terms of there being a death penalty for this. I realize this might not be your specialization and you might not know about the details, but at this time and in this place, 18th century Bavaria, what other kinds of things were they giving the death penalty for? I'm trying to compare how serious they were about this. I mean, if we were told today, yeah, if you're recruiting for your secret group, we'll kill you. Obviously that seems pretty draconian today. At that time, I imagine there were more things that you could be killed for. But I'm just trying to get a sense of the relative harshness of that sentence. And I also wanted to ask, do you know what it was specifically that the Bavarians were upset about? Was it like basically treason? He was trying to overthrow the government. What drove them to put forth this penalty, and how harsh was it compared to other things?
I think they would argue with high treason. I'm not very familiar about other penalties that would lead to death, but we're certainly going to talk about another criminal offense, though I would have to look up what the penalty would be. Because now we're going to go into the... now that Weishaupt is in exile in Gotha, he starts justifying himself and he starts attacking those who criticize him. And he publishes a brief justification of my intentions in 1787. And there he justifies himself because in the Illuminati letters that were published, in one of those letters, Adam Weishaupt writes about how he had sexual intercourse with his sister-in-law. His sister-in-law got pregnant and he aborted the child. And mind that at this time, this was a criminal offense. It is not like today. And now this is published and everybody can read that he had sexual intercourse with his dead wife's sister, which is called Blutschande, blood shame. It was a criminal offense in Bavaria, and he aborted his child. And he tries to justify himself by saying, I wanted to apply to the Church of Rome because he lives in Bavaria, Catholicism, blah, blah, blah. He wanted to apply to be granted that he can marry his sister-in-law, but he writes that the Jesuits used their influence to deny this application. And I quote him, "In an hour of weakness, I replenished myself in the lap of this good friend," his sister-in-law. And then about the abortion, he writes, he makes a deontological argument. He said that this was only to protect his wife, his sister-in-law, from criminal persecution.
I certainly like the idea of replenishing myself in the lap of a good friend. If I ever get busted, with a woman, I'll just look up and say, I was replenishing myself in her lap. Nicely phrased.
It gets even better. He says, my wife's pregnancy was in the 3rd month. And as the application for the remarriage was denied, her and my prostitution would be inevitable. So in these times, prostitution must have had another sense. He uses this word all the time with the other members. This will lead me to prostitution. But yeah, it's quite funny. And of course, the Jesuits are extremely happy about this. So here we have Benedikt Stadler. He is a Jesuit. He is a professor for theology at Ingolstadt. He writes a whole book titled The Secret of the Wickedness of the Founder of Illuminatism in Bavaria. And he says that, no. Weishaupt hasn't really repented the marrying his sister-in-law and the abortion. And the best proof of his wickedness is that Weishaupt is not in humility accepting his sin, but he justifies it. And this is just a sign of his wickedness. And he calls him,
It just, well, go on. What did he call him?
He calls him a Kindsmörder, a child murderer.
Yeah, this really seems to me as though what we're seeing here is that Weishaupt, who clearly was unable to appear humble in any way from all the examples you've given, clearly had a very, very high opinion of himself. It looks like he's here being killed by his own success, in the sense that he was so successful in spreading and infiltrating things that when Bode came along and started to bring in these higher ranking people, this essentially brought it to the attention of people higher up the food chain who would care much more about this. I mean, as soon as you start telling an autocrat that you aim to remove him, you're no longer going to get invitations to the parties. In fact, you might find yourself under penalty of death and having all sorts of figures writing really nasty books about you. Does that seem like what's happening here?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Jesuits, Weishaupt was trying to remove them from the University of Ingolstadt. In all of the published writings, it is quite clear that he hates the Jesuits, that he wants to overthrow monarchy and the Catholic Church. And now he gets his reckoning. And Weishaupt then goes on to say that the only error he ever committed was to abort his child. That's the only error. And he is not sorry at all for founding the Illuminati. He's only sorry for that the Illuminati were discovered. And he said the only goal of this project was to further reason, virtue to the best of mankind. And then, of course, Stadler, our Jesuit friend, he has a comment on that. And he says, no. Weishaupt was infected by, I quote, an evil genius. And this happened probably through books. This is what Stadler says. He must have read bad books. And he says Weishaupt is, I quote, an enemy of true Christian religion, an enemy of the state, and a seducer of the best part of our youth. Does this ring a bell? It reminded me of Socrates.
Certainly corrupting the morals of the youth of Athens. Yes. And didn't we see a similar thing play out? We were talking about Gemistos Plethon, and wasn't there a Byzantine priest who got after him and attacked him in a similar way for his bad morals and his reading of unpleasant things? We just keep seeing the same things echoed.
Yeah. The Book of the Law, so Gemistos Plethon's Book of the Law was burned by this very priest you're mentioning here. And we only know of this book through the correspondence between this priest and the Byzantine empress. And yes, he really hated Platon for the pagan views he was promoting. And Platon, of course, had a huge followership. He was considered one of the greatest intellectuals of the Byzantine Empire. And Stadler then goes on to say that we can clearly see that Weishaupt is against Christianity, because Weishaupt does not recommend one pro-Christian book to his candidates, but rather he recommends materialist literature like D'Holbach's Système Social, which we have here, where D'Holbach denies that there is, for instance, the original sin, that religions are just an invention to control human people and to rule them more easily. Yes, and this is pretty much it on the Illuminati. The Illuminati are now more or less done for. They move into hiding, into exile at Duke Ernest, and Johann Joachim Christoph Bode then continues the works of the Illuminati. But I mean, of course, everybody knows about them. Most people know who the most important members are. Their cipher is known, and I would conclude that that was pretty much it. Is there anything you wanted to say? I have some final questions I would like to discuss with you also.
Yeah, and if and I don't know how much time you have. It'd probably be good if we can wrap it at with under 3 hours. But if we do have once you say what it is you had wanted to bring up, perhaps we can, if you have time, take a few questions and cut this at 3 hours. See if there are any questions people wanted to ask us from earlier in the stream. Do you have time for that?
Sure, I have.
Okay. Well, first off, yeah, let's go to what you wanted to mention in closing.
Alrighty. So the thing I still don't quite understand is, why do ruling princes associate with revolutionary movements? For instance, Duke Ernst, he identifies with the political goals of the order. He grants asylum to Adam Weishaupt. And another example is Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, who becomes a revolutionary, who houses the Jacobin Club, who protects revolutionaries during the beginning of the revolution, who becomes a member of the National Convention, and who votes that his cousin Louis XVI be put to death, and who then, ironically, later is also put to death. So I must say at this moment, I don't have an explanation why this happens. But what is your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But the first thing that comes, because there are many different ways in which it could be explained. One of them is simply that human beings are human beings, and despite their social class, you will inevitably have a certain number of people from whatever group who fall within a psychological profile, and therefore, get drawn down a particular course of action. However, more specifically, I think one possibility could be, and it's difficult to see today because of all the lies that have been told about the past in many respects, all the lies that have been told about aristocrats and class systems in the past. They're doubtless not all good, but one possible explanation is that they did have an idea of noblesse oblige. And of course, because of the excesses of the French aristocrats and what happened with the French Revolution, and because of the fact that the victors invariably end up writing the histories, it's easy for us to look back and say, oh, it was all bullshit. They just, they're absolutely abusive and exploited everyone. But I think it is a reality that, many of these people were raised with a sense of noblesse oblige, and they were understood to be the class that had to take care of people. Now, I'm not saying they did it correctly all the time. I'm not saying that there weren't, monstrous examples of it going in the other direction. But, a simple explanation is that someone who had been raised since their childhood for the purpose of rulership and had had it hammered into their heads for, their entire formative period, that their duty, not just their, not just what happened to interest them, but their actual duty or their true vocation, particularly within the religious systems that were around at the time, they would have been called upon to do their best as leaders for their fellow men. And so if someone came along with the right packaging and said, well, you are the ruling class, so it devolves upon you to come up with a way to realize these things that would make it better for everyone, I would imagine that you might have a receptive audience. So that's the only thing that really occurs to me, other than the idea that simply most human beings, no matter what their class, they're going to have various types and psychological profiles and the rest.
Sure. Okay. So a noblesse oblige, and that they are open to ideas of the Enlightenment, and they are saying, okay, we're just doing this for the common weal, for the common good.
And what did you use? What was the term? It wasn't Zeitgeist. Was it Weltgeist? What was it earlier that you mentioned?
The Weltgeist. This is a conception of Hegel. Hegel said, for instance, that Napoleon was the Geschäftsführer des Weltgeistes. Hegel was the CEO of the world spirit. And then he said Napoleon was the CEO of the world spirit. And the world spirit moves towards ever more freedom.
Right. So there's this idea of this ineluctable progress and the fact that particular human beings are sort of extruded at different points as a manifestation of this driving will that manifests in history as these developing processes. But, I think maybe it's Zeitgeist then is a better term, but the idea that simply these men were all carried up in the spirit of the day. You can look around. I mean, we swim in the water of social justice and progress at the moment. So there are any number of ruling elites that simply, this is the tit they grew up sucking and they don't know any other thing. So yeah, perhaps these others were simply just wrapped up in what was going on around them and wanted to sort of to be on the right side of history, as they like to say.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good analogy with the present. I mean, a lot of people are cutting off the branch they're sitting on without realizing it, or maybe they are realizing it, but they think they're doing something good. Yes.
Yeah, pathological altruism seems to be a particularly white affliction. So, yeah, I've yet to see any other group than Europeans traveling the earth to save everyone. I mean, I suppose I should look at it more carefully. Maybe you've got, there were clearly Buddhists who brought the religion to the Far East and the rest. So some monks did get out there from other ethnic groups or racial groups, or however you want to construe it, and tried to share the good news. The Muslims do it, in terms of the idea of one centralizing religion. But the whites seem to be unique in the sense of self-effacement. But perhaps I'm wrong about that. There may be some facet of Buddhism that I'm not taking into consideration. But yeah, perhaps it's that pathological altruism.
I'm still waiting for Chinese or Japanese to come out. We have to abolish yellowism.
Yeah, keep waiting, though. You never know. With enough time. All sorts of people can have their minds changed about what they're supposed to do. So, perhaps in 50 or 100 years, we won't be the only group cutting off our own naughty bits to punish ourselves. So, yeah. And did you have other points you wanted to cover there?
Yeah, maybe just a final point. What I'm taking away from the Illuminati is that I think can we really keep a secret society secret? Because especially today, all the communication would be digital. You would leave traces everywhere. I mean, the Illuminati also, in order to function, they have to have a system of correspondences. And I mean, today you can just hack into a computer, or just somebody leaves a phone, and there would be a point in time where a secret society would be revealed, I think. I cannot imagine that a secret society like the Illuminati could exist today without being uncovered after a few years. So what do you think?
Unless they're the ones actually at the levers of power relative to these tools you're talking about. So, it's kind of like, what level you operate on. So if you operate at the level where you tell the people who tell the people who tell the people to do this with social media and to do this with government surveillance and the rest. I mean, I realize it sounds a bit far-fetched to imagine that there's some group of people up above everyone else who are that much in control. And I certainly don't subscribe to the idea that there's, unity of purpose over time with a lot of these organizations. It's difficult to manage that. I don't believe that, you simply have one group that controls everything. There's always conflicts. There's always people on the outs who want in. There's always the possibility of someone seizing the power, like a Napoleon appearing. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to imagine that there's not a group, but that there are groups that operate high enough up the food chain that their operations are unknown to the vast majority of the public, simply because nobody watches the watchers.
Yes. Well, I must say, I don't have any more questions. Is there maybe anything from the chat that we want to respond to? Or?
Well, we're getting a little bit close on here. If we get too far down a road with answering one of the questions, not that I don't want to take questions, as my viewers should know, I always like to, but I do want to try to cut this at 3 hours. You've certainly, you've been carrying all the weight in this discussion, so you probably need a break yourself. So let's, instead of trying to rush one in and then rush our closing, why don't, first off, I should tell everybody that you can follow Antaios. Hopefully I remembered this time to put it in the chat. Let me make sure. In the description. Yeah, I did include the Twitter link for you, Antaios. I hope that in future you will put together a channel for yourself so I can help you promote that. But I'm certainly very, very happy to have you on as a guest. I look forward to us speaking again in future. Before I say my final things, maybe I can ask you to tell us what might be coming next. Do we have another one of these to expect? And if we do, which one is it?
We do. So it's probably we're going to do both. So the French Revolution and the involvement of Freemasons. And then, as a highlight, the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society in 1921.
Thule.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so that's so basically we'll be moving into the 20th century.
Exactly.
In that,
but these are going to be two separate streams because time-wise, they are too disconnected.
Yes. So we will get to see what was going on with the folkish societies and the appearance of journals in Germany like Heimdall and Odal, and yes, and what's it called, Sinnbildforschung. So yes, that should be quite interesting as well, because that will overlap to a certain extent, I think, with figures like Aleister Crowley and what is his name, Theodor Roos. And Reus or some such, however you pronounce that in German, and the OTO Crowley, that should be interesting as well. All right, well, then I look forward to that very, very much. So let me thank you again, Antaios. Sorry your camera isn't here. Otherwise, everybody could be seeing your smiling face as well. I want to thank everyone who stayed with us for this very, very long stream. I also want to thank the mods in the house. I noticed you guys, Fiend J, Mr. Ixme, John Ski, and others were trying to jump on that damn spamming crap it was that kept appearing through the course of this. I reported them. So hopefully we're not going to see too much more of that. Anyway.
You always get spam with the Illuminati.
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah. The black helicopters are outside my window. I can hear them now. We will be back soon. Thank you all once again. Until that magic moment comes, which will hopefully be sooner and later than later, I can only say I am Semiogogue, and I am out.